Hey everyone, today we are going to chat about requirements interchange format. If you work in systems engineering or software development, you have probably run into challenges exchanging requirements in your daily tasks. Today, we take a look at reqif and see how it can help us. So, what is reqif? You should take this overview here, where we have tool A and tool B, in which these tools want to exchange requirements. If you see here on the right side, we have a requirement that we want to exchange with 2B. Using reqif, this tool on the left side would have to export the contents of this requirement specification to the reqif format. And then the other tool would have to import it and then present it to the user so it can be consumed. So the key of everything here is that it's a well-defined standard. It was initially created by ProStep, and lately it was standardized by the object management governance. It basically keeps requirements from getting lost in translation when we exchange them between tools. The key of everything is, of course, the standard, the structure, the way data is organized, but also the fact that we have this global unique identifiers that we use between tools to identify whether a requirement or an element within the structure has been changed or not. So now, why do we care? Yeah, and what can go wrong if we don't have standardized data formats, right? So I have listed here, but without something like reqif, things can get messy very quickly. We might end up with the wrong piece of data in the wrong side, right? We might end up with data loss, with no traceability, with misinterpretation of exchanged data, and the fact is we do not want that. Using reqif keeps everything consistent, structured, trackable, and I think that that's a win for everybody. I just want to highlight here data loss in conversion. So that means when we have to exchange data from one side to the other or to import data into a tool that is not the original data format that we are feeding into that tool. This happens very often when we want to import like unstructured Word documents into, say, something like a database or to any tool really that requires a structured format. So you're gonna see that, it's difficult in an environment such as Word to have everything standardized, and then you're gonna have issues when importing or exporting data. So we do want to adhere to templates and frameworks, right? So we want to find standardized ways of exchanging data. We want to prevent all the issues we have discussed so far. Okay, so in this session, I want to give you an overview of just a feeling really of how a reqif document looks like. On the chart here, you can find this on the PDF from the OMG organization. Later in this video, I'm going to share the link with you. But for now, this is a chart that I have extracted that helps me to illustrate what is this file here about. So you can see here, we have the root node, which is the reqif, the container of everything. Inside the root node, so these nodes are not available in this image here. For now, just the reqif content. But then in the root node, you're going to see the header. And in the header, we can add several information like versions or comments, specification or project information in general. We're going to see that in more detail later on. But then here in the core content, you see reqif content. We have data types, we have spec types, we have spec objects, we have spec relations, we have specifications, and we have relations groups. So in this case, the document doesn't have relation groups. Yeah, so this is, if you would be working with a reqif document, I highly recommend you find out whether your tool, the tool of choice that you want to be importing or exporting requirements is actually reqif compliant or it supports reqif. I know, for example, in an old team, we used to import requirements, reqif formats into this tool. This tool could not export reqif, but it could import reqif. And it was of great help to us, so we could trace our requirements to the code and to the models being developed. So quite handy. Yeah, so the next one here are the data types. So we have a section in the reqif documents for data types. Data types we can define as we need, but here I would say we have the data types that covers more than 90% of the cases that we need. So you have the HTML, we have the strings, we have enumerations. Of course, for each enumeration, we need to create the actual enum values, right? So in this case, the content type is a requirement or is a header. Then we have another enum here with content state, whether it's in the review, approved, and so on. That's it with the data types. Then we have the spec types. So the spec types is where things start to get more exciting or a little bit more complicated. This is where we define attributes for specific objects. In this case, the first element here shows attributes that are going to be available for each requirement entry. In this case, you can see that this attribute is a title, description, content types, and status. And then when we actually instantiate a spec object of spec object type, we need to add values to each one of those attributes, right? So if you're a front-end developer, you might be imagining already how you would work with this data. So this would tell you the column names and the column types, and then the values comes from the entries themselves. Then we have the specification type. It's just so that if you're creating a document, you can also add attributes to that document, right? So you can create like a description, status, other custom data that you might need to attach to the specification. Then we have also here an example for a relation type. This is of a connect to. This can be used when we're creating links. You can select which type of this relation it is. So very flexible, very customizable, but we need to know what we are doing. The dangerous thing here is, and this is where things starts to get complicated, is we might have specifications that within the specification, we can accept different object types. So for example, we might accept a requirement type, which has this set of columns, but then we also might accept other object types, so mixed, that has another set of columns. So in this, we're going to be talking a little bit later. Spec objects. So the spec objects are actually the places where we are going to hold the values, so the entries for each one of the specification lines. So you might see a spec object as a entry or as a requirement or as use case. And these are the containers of the values. You see here they have a type, and the type is linking to the spec object type. So that here is the basis to know which values we need to create attributes for. So the attributes are actually defined here. This guy earlier on, and then here are all the places where the values are defined. Depending on the data type or the attribute type, the value might be, in this case, a string, can be as an attribute of the node here, but if it's an XML, it's gonna be a child of the node. So this is how a specification look like. So specifications is where everything comes together, really. And you can see here a specification. Here are the values relative to the specification. For example, if this is a new document, we can have a title, we can have a description, we can have a status of this document, so we can attach values to this specification. But then here's where the data actually starts to get together. It's where we start adding the rows, so the entries of the specification. So as per the documentation, we have a children node, and then we start building the spec hierarchies. The spec hierarchy is key for the reqif format, is where we link we get together. There's an example later here, but is where we link an object with a row within the hierarchy of this specification. I'm gonna give an example here on the side. When we create spec objects, we create them flat, one after the other. But then in order to give them a structure or a position within the document, so which line or which subchapter it's going to belong or has to be rendered, we need to build a virtual hierarchy. And then each hierarchy we need to link the objects to it. So in this example, we have object A being the first node of the hierarchy. We have object B being a child of parent A, right? Then it will be rendered on this manner. And then we have object C being a sibling of object A in this case. So if we would render this structure now, this is how we would expect data to be displayed. Yeah, so this is a corner case that I found when I was implementing my custom reqif compatible tool. It's a quite interesting issue that you cannot find much guidance in the documentation because that's not the purpose of the documentation. But this cost me some hours of thinking, if not days. The specification, as mentioned earlier, enables us to have multiple object types within a specification. That means we might have a requirement type, a line which is requirement type, and the other line which is a use case, for example, or a test case, right? So you can see here where the problem is. The object type requirement type has 4 fields: title, description, content type, and status. And the object type use case has 3 fields. In this case, they have the same name, title, description, rationale, but that doesn't mean anything. It's just like a string here, but they're different. Then if you would try to put this as it is on a front end, like on a tabular manner, you would probably render them in sequence, right? So on the first 4 ones here, they're from the left side, the requirement ones, and the right ones are the one that comes with the use cases. So if you would have this situation where you have a use case coming first, all the cells where the requirements are would be empty. And then we would see data from the use case. But then if you would have the next elements being requirements, you'd see data here in these first 4 columns, and all the rest would be empty. So if you think on user face, real estate, this is not something that we would like to have. I personally don't like this, and I had to work around to find alternatives for this. Examples of how you could address this issue is one is the way I did in my current tool. I have a view where there are no columns. So you can see here the first line is a use case. It just happens that in this example, the fields are the same, but they are not the same attribute types. So you see this one is use case, the other one's requirement. So they are all rendered in line. So then we don't care about the structure. So we would have here, we might have 1 field. Here we might have 5 fields. It doesn't matter. The GUI would work regardless. Another slightly more complex alternative would be to offer your user a custom column configurator, where the user would open a table and select which values or which attributes could come in this column, right? Would have here the titles of both requirements and use cases, descriptions, but then here starts getting a little bit more difficult where we need to decide what to do. We see requirements as content type, but use case has not. So what do we do here? The user puts it together, puts it separated. If we put separated, we're gonna have empty data, empty cells, or if put together, it might be that here we render a type, and here, when is a requirement, we render a type. When is a use case, we render a rationale or something. So potentially can get very messy. So if you're implementing a tool, planning to implement a front end for reqif, you need to think in these situations. I would suggest going to something like no columns would make life easier at the beginning. Global unique identifier. So I just want to invest a couple of minutes here. So this is where magic happens really. Besides having data structure, global unique identifiers is actually the responsible for enabling us to identifying a piece of information that came from one file into the other, whether this data has been changed or has been removed or has been added into the document. So this is how we do it. You can, in your tool, you can either rely 100% on the global identifier fields that comes from the reqif that you are exchanging, but in my specification, in my tool, I have decided to work with two identifiers. So one is the global identifier, the other one is an internal ID. This way I keep my operations simpler to handle, and I know that these will not have issues because the users can always go there and change manually the GUIDs when we are exchanging documentation. Yeah, so you're gonna find in the market several tools that are reqif compliant. What I have noticed is I don't have vast experience with all of these tools, but I have seen that not all of them supports 100% of every single corner case that the reqif format offers. So at some point, I think developers need to make a smart decision, say, okay, this is the amount of the specification that we are going to support, because the specification can get very heavy. I think we shoot for, I don't know, 80, 90% of the use cases, and the other use cases we will not have. What happens is that sometimes while exchanging between tools, you might have errors, right? If they are not implementing the standard in the same way, and there are ways which things can be interpreted differently. Yeah, I just want to point out that you can also do your own tool, right? Using things like Python. In my case, I have implemented a web application called Elegant, and it uses Python and Django to do all the reqif work. Yeah, so this is the demo. You can see here the overall structure, but you can see here we have the header, right? The header has some entries under it. So we have the title, we have optional information that goes in there, a description. Then we get to the content where we have the data types, the specification types. Then we have the spec object. So the spec object, these are the places where we are storing all the data. So the content that will appear in the document lines. You can see here we can also have HTML, right? So this is appeared in there, and so on and so forth. So this is a not so big of a document, but you can see it can get lengthy because of the structure. In this case, we don't have any tool extensions, but we can also have those. I think this is what I wanted to show regarding the demo. Yeah, so if you can take a look on the OMG document, the Object Management Group, the website, you can actually download the full reqif, the Requirements Interchange Format. The PDF is there, and the PDF is very useful. I have used most of the things I needed to implement a new tool based on the Requirements Interchange Format came from this document here. So very detailed. Sometimes I need to do some brain exercise to understand how to interpret information, but it's extremely well done. The group here did a great job defining it. So here's an example of tools exchanging reqif information from one side to the other. This is a very common operation. For example, if you talk about the automotive industry, where you have all the tiers, all the suppliers exchanging requirements from one side to the other. So having a requirement interchangeable format tool in both sides is very important. The critical problem here is that, say that in one organization we're gonna have IBM doors running, the other one we're gonna have Codebeamer running. They need to have a way to communicate and understand the same documentation. Very often the documentation are also used as part of the contract between the organizations. So they need to be reliable pieces of information. The classes are very well defined. The only thing for me that was very hard that I couldn't get from the documentation is the fact that a specification, so it's pretty clear that the specification can have multiple object types, but then if you're implementing a GUI, a front end to which you want to display that in a user friendly way, it's not so simple. You need to take some assumptions and do some design, take some design decisions into your project. reqif enables for seamless requirement exchange across different tools. The key concepts include standardization, traceability, and automation, and then successfully integrating tools for usable front ends require appropriate handling of the corner cases, as I have just mentioned. So if you need to implement a tool that is reqif compliant, be aware that implementing the GUI might require some exercises. Yeah, so the content that I have presented here today was based on my own experiences trying to implement a front end for a reqif compatible tool. Yeah, so I have this tool. It is available. It's, of course, it's just a side project. It's a project that enables me to learn about this technology, and it's called Elegant, and it's free. Right now is even AI enhanced, so you can derive use cases and create requirements, review requirements, create requirements, go from creating the use cases down to the requirements and reviewing them. So it's quite handy. Feel free to check it out. And yeah, so that was it from my end. My name is Armando Perico. I'm the author and the main developer of elegant.com. Thanks for joining today, and I'll see you the next time.